Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and kick things off here. We may have a few folks join us, but I want to make sure we have the most time that we can today. So my name is Jennifer Rybak. I am proud to serve as president of the Dallas Association of Young Lawyers this year. Obviously, I am a woman lawyer, and as such, I'm passionate about this issue and figuring out what we can do to keep women in the practice of law, but more importantly, get more women to obtain equity partnerships, judicial positions, etc. This topic has obviously been covered a lot, but we thought we would take a different approach to it, set up an interview series like we have done, and really hear from some powerhouse women in our legal community, both the interviewees and the interviewers in the series. And so we're continuing that today, and we're excited to be doing so with today's interview team. So we have Monica Lattin, who's a partner at Carrington Coleman. She is an amazing female litigator listed in all of the state lists that you can imagine. And she's no stranger to the DAYL. She served on the DAYL Board of Directors earlier in her career and was actually named DAYL's Outstanding Young Lawyer at one point as well. So please join me in welcoming Monica Lattin. And today, Monica will be interviewing Chief Judge Barbara M.G. Lynn of the United States District Court for the Northern District of Texas. According to my research, and I know Judge Lynn will correct me if this is wrong, but I believe she was the first female associate at Carrington Coleman, and later became the first female partner at the firm. So she is no stranger to these issues, having forged the path for herself. She's also a longtime DAYL supporter, having served as DAYL president earlier in her career, and was also a very successful litigator before taking the bench, and of course, just recently named as the first female chief in the Northern District. We are excited to have Judge Lynn and would ask that you help me welcome her. Take it away, Monica.
Testing, testing. Me too. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. All right. We are happy to be here today, and I'm really honored and delighted to have the excuse to spend some time with Judge Lynn. She's well known, I know, to everyone in the room, and I think her story may be well known to a lot of people in the room, but we're going to spend some time today talking about, in particular, her experience as a practicing lawyer. I think if you ask people for adjectives to describe Judge Lynn, you would get words and phrases like trailblazer, force of nature, brilliant, fearless, also integrity and a fierce dedication to the law. And all of those things were an important part of her practice as a practicing lawyer, which I was lucky enough to be part of when I was a young associate. And also, traits that certainly have carried over to her service on the bench. Judge Lynn was a tremendously successful lawyer in the Dallas legal community, and not just a tremendously successful woman lawyer. She was really just one of the finest lawyers in the city and certainly elsewhere. So that's what we want to focus on a little bit today. Judge Lynn has said she'd be happy to answer questions. We'll leave some time at the end, but if anyone wants to pipe up mid-talk, we're certainly happy to recognize that. So I want to start with the topic that Jennifer asked us to focus on, which is talking a little bit about the progress of women in the profession. We've certainly come a long way since your time in law school, at SMU Law School, and you are partly responsible for the progress that women have made in the profession on a local level. Can you tell the audience a little bit about your experience as a law student and your early experience as a litigant?
Well, good afternoon. I was naive in thinking that if I was first in my class in law school, as I was, that all doors would be open to me, and my classmates were equally naive. Of the top 10 students in my class at SMU, 5 were women, including the top 2 students, even though we were about 15% of the class, so we did very well. I actually was very fortunate to get a summer job with Carrington Coleman. It was a fluke. Carrington Coleman used to give an award to the #1 student in the first year class, and I got it. And they had me down to lunch at the City Club where we had to eat in the ladies' dining room. And I thought, these people are great. And I kind of hinted around that I sure could use a job for the summer. And they hinted back that they didn't hire any first-year students, but suggested I send my resume and maybe they could make suggestions. So I sent my resume, and then they called and said, well, maybe we'll change our minds. And so I got a job. So I really didn't have to work very hard at it after my first year. Meanwhile, my friends were having terrible experiences in interviewing. They were asked questions like, well, how are you going to do your job as a trial lawyer and have supper ready for your husband when he gets home from work? And similar questions like that about plans to have children and so forth. And it was awful. And so we got together and formed the Association of Women Law Students and then sued 5 law firms. And I think back about how ironic it is that I am a federal judge after I started my career in that way. There were times when I didn't think it was going to end quite so well. We were not very popular when we took that cause on. I, as I said, was very fortunate because it really didn't cost me anything. I ended up with a firm I wanted to go with anyway, but I think some of my friends were not quite so fortunate because they didn't have a job, and that made us all pariahs in some quarters. On the other hand, Bob Gwynn, who was the lead defense lawyer for the one firm that went to trial, was responsible for giving me my first responsible job in the Dallas Bar Association. So he was actually very helpful to me in advancing my career, and I never held it against Bob personally, of course, that he was taking on the defense of the law firm. Somebody had to do it, and they had a lot more money for the defense than we had for the plaintiff's side. So I had experience as a litigant, which I think has made me sensitive to the challenges associated with that role. Things were beginning to change when we came out of law school, and I think our actions hastened the change. But we were not welcomed with open arms in the Bar Association, and frankly, some women that had struggled to achieve success in the profession were somewhat resentful of our efforts because many of them felt that they had been successful without suing the law firms, and that perhaps taking that kind of aggressive action was not the best way to go. Obviously, we disagreed, but at the end of the day, I think we assisted in opening the doors for female lawyers, but it was challenging.
In the time since that time, obviously, a lot of things have changed. A lot of things have changed for the better. As you compare, now to then, what do you think is better? How would you describe the way the practice has evolved for women lawyers in particular?
Well, in terms of what I see in court, there are many more women in court than there used to be. I have cases now, it would not be unusual for all the lawyers to be women. That's particularly true for the U.S. Attorney's Office because there are a lot of women who have gone into government service. So I see a lot more women than I used to. The problem is, and I know you're going to get to this, Monica, is that what happens is that women get to a certain level of achievement and then they divert out of practice. And it's not the level where you might think, although attrition happens all along the way. It's particularly at the senior levels. And so if you can't have women who are running law firms, then the things that make law firms less attractive to women will never change. And I think women leave law practice for many reasons. One reason is that they don't like the law firm model. These generalizations don't apply to everyone, of course, but as a general proposition, I think women are more collegial in their approach to law practice. They're perfectly happy to work on a team, and the guys like to be the head of the team. And so success in law firms is measured in ways that typically judge characteristics that are more common among men than women. And so I think a lot of women just don't like it, and they get to a level where they made a lot of money and they don't have to work, and they choose not to. So the ABA is very interested in this phenomenon because I think we've been very successful in getting women into the pipeline. I think now there may be more women graduating from law school than men. And so women start out in law firms, but they drop out at a higher rate than men, often voluntarily. And then if they come back, they drop out again at a more senior level. And that should be of concern because diversity, all kinds of diversity, particularly in the law firm setting, is very valuable to the advancement of the rule of law in the United States. So I think we should be paying attention to this subject. Law firms were what, when I was coming out of law school, everybody wanted. It was less appealing to go to work for government. Now I think women are looking at government and academia as more attractive options than law firms.
Yeah, I agree. It's hard to generalize, and it's a delicate subject to discuss. You know, everyone has their own path. I know in the course of my career, I remember worrying about things like, is it okay to wear pants to court when I first joined the firm? And there weren't as many role models out there. One of the things that's changed, I think also from my perspective is, and this may be part of what you're talking about, women seeking out alternate legal practices, but the rise of the woman in the corporate setting, increasing numbers of women who are our clients when we represent businesses, and you know, including at the general counsel level, a lot of progress left to be made. But I think that we'll see a ripple effect in perhaps supporting women lawyers along the way, whether intentionally or not, from that.
I think that's a good point. I see a lot more general counsels for big corporations who are women than I used to. Let me make one comment about the issue of what to wear to court. So I didn't have any role models to help me with this problem. I'll tell a funny story that's not directly that close, but the same issue of lack of role model. So when I first joined Carrington Coleman, all of the lawyers, who were all men, had on their nameplates, Mr. Jones. So our office manager came to me and wanted to know if I wanted to have Mrs. Lynn or Ms. Lynn. And I thought, wow, this is just going to be really hard on the clients. They've never seen a woman lawyer. If I have Mrs. Lynn, they're going to feel more comfortable when they come into my office that I'm married. So I went for Mrs. Lynn. And every other woman that came after me had Ms. So I was the dinosaur lawyer. And then when we moved, and we had first name and last name, hallelujah, burn that nameplate, wherever it might be. And when I went to the firm, there was this issue of what was appropriate to wear to court. And this is my mom, by the way, wave mom. So my mom might or might not remember that I had a one-piece pantsuit that had a gold vest and dark-colored pants. And I wore that to court. And I mean, I had a vest. The guys were, you know, that was when you dressed up, you were wearing a vest. So I wore this. And as I was leaving, people were like, where are you going? I thought, well, I'm not looking at you for a role model. Although later on we did. So I wore that. And then we all started wearing these little bow tie things. We were doing our very best to look like the guys. And if you look really hard, you will find on the internet, I'm sure, an article about how we were dressing. And we all did our very best to look like men. And then one day, it was the equivalent of burning your bra, but not the same. We liberated ourselves from those clothes, and we could wear whatever we want, including, heaven forbid, a dress. But when I became a judge 18 years ago, a number of women lawyers asked me to talk to one of my colleagues who had a rule, no pants in court. And so that was only 18 years ago. So these things move glacially sometimes. And one thing that is comforting now is to know that there is not a single norm of behavior. However, I will remind everyone, because I have on occasion been asked to give talks about demeanor and dress and style in court. And one thing I will suggest, and this is a comment I would make to men as well, you are not there on your own account. You are there on behalf of someone else. There is a line beyond which you should not be expected to go. You should not take any abuse of any kind that is other than just a tough judge being tough on lawyers. But if you think that a judge might be offended by a particularly short dress in court, or a jury might be, then you should not wear that because you're carrying somebody else's water. And it's not appropriate for you to forget about that when you're in court. So sometimes, and I still have to do this because I'm carrying the weight of my office. So sometimes I have to behave in a more conservative fashion than I would but for that, and that's true across the board. I have had occasion where jurors wrote me notes, and this will happen more to women than to men because men don't have much of a challenge in getting dressed. There's a jacket, a shirt, a tie, and hopefully a pair of pants. Women have a lot more options, and so sometimes we don't satisfy the expectations of a jury. And if you have a jury writing a note to the judge that the female lawyer's low-cut top or extremely short skirt is distracting, then you made an error in judgment in what you chose to wear that morning.
Good advice. It's hard to believe you've been on the bench not quite as long, but you're approaching almost as long as a judge as you were a lawyer in private practice. You had an active, robust legal career for a long time. Can you talk a little bit about your practice and the kinds of cases that you handled and what you enjoyed and why about being a litigator?
I was very fortunate in the mentors I had at Carrington Coleman. They had a lot of confidence in me. They would get me on a case and then sometimes disappear, which was great because at Carrington Coleman, perhaps because of the compensation system at that time, which was a lockstep compensation, there was no competition among the lawyers. So people would say all the time, steal my client, because they didn't care. As long as the client stayed with the firm, it wasn't my client, it was the firm's client. So Jim Coleman in particular was great about showing up to get the client and then letting me convince the client that he didn't have to come back again. And usually I did. And so that gave me a lot of responsibility. I could always go to the partners I was working for, Jim Coleman, Fletcher Yarborough, Bob Mauer, the people I worked for the most. And all of them were fabulous mentors who didn't hog business, who introduced me to clients. And I bonded with the clients, and then they thought of me as their lawyer. And that was really a tremendous opportunity for me. And because I was a good lawyer and I had a good reputation, I was able to build on that to develop clients. And I never had a problem with what I think is the number one impediment to women being successful business getters, and that is being reluctant to ask. I never had that problem of being reluctant to ask. Probably my mom was a good role model for me in that regard. She worked from the time I was young, and if you wanted something, you asked for it. And if they said no and there was a reasonable way to get it anyway, then you would go get it. And so that was the attitude that I always had. The firm was wonderful about supporting me in those efforts and supporting me when I hit an ethical wall. in terms of some disagreement with the client in supporting me in that effort. I'll give you an example of that. So Jim and I had a case, and I had gone out to look at the client's documents for document production, and there was really an incredible smoking gun that was about to shoot our legs and arms off. And I mean, it was really bad. You talk about a smoking gun, but there rarely is one in a case, but this was one. And came time for the document production, and I went through the documents that the client had produced, and it wasn't there. And I said to the client, well, where's I called it something else, but where's the smoking gun? And he said, I don't know what you're talking about. There's no such thing. So I went to Jim, and I told Jim, and I was too young to be able to achieve the objective myself of getting the client to give me the document, but Jim wasn't. And he had a little sit down with the client, and the document was produced. At the very beginning of my career, I had a client I was working with Jim on a case, and the client said, Jim, I don't want any female lawyers on my file. And Jim said, no problem, here's your file, and just fired the client. So, those kinds of supportive efforts gave me courage to go out there and get involved in bar activities and other activities that caused me to meet potential clients and then ask them to give me their business. So the greatest competition I had for a while was with my husband, because he's a very good business getter, and we would go out, and I would not want to go out with him because we might both be competing for the client. So I just decided that to be successful as a lawyer, I had to have a book of business, not because I wanted to leave, because I never really thought of leaving the firm. I loved working there. But because that was a mark of success in the practice. And so I decided that I would mold the client's interest to my own, and that made business development not onerous. So if I wanted to see a play, I would invite a potential client to the play. And then if I didn't get any business, at least I got to see the play. And the firm usually paid for the play. So I was very calculated about it. Mike and I, as young lawyers, both got involved in the ABA litigation section, and we discovered that the firm would pay for us to go to the ABA meetings. And so we would plan our vacation after the ABA meeting, so the firm always paid for us to go on vacation. I don't remember commenting on this when I worked there, but true confessions now, the statute of limitations has run. But we both were very active in the bar, in the ABA, and still are, and got a lot of business as a result of the contacts we made. So that was a win-win situation, and we loved the work that we did. Some of our very closest friends are people we met in the ABA section of litigation, even now. And so I just did things I wanted to do and brought the clients and the potential clients along with me.
You've certainly been involved in professional legal associations your whole career, going all the way back to what was probably then the Dallas Junior Bar, now known as the Dallas Association of Young Lawyers, and then obviously into the American Bar Association. She was the chair of the litigation section before she took the bench, and has held numerous other roles in the ABA. She's also one of the founders of Attorneys Serving the Community, a group many of us in this room know well. Past president of the Higginbotham Inn of Court, involved now as a judge in myriad organizations, including the Judicial Conference of the United States. There's something that draws you to this wide variety of activities that have as a common element that they're all lawyers. What is it that causes you to spend your free time and your public service time working in organizations with lawyers?
Well, when you take these psychological tests and you'll determine whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. I'm an extrovert, my husband's an introvert, even though he is very outgoing in a lot of ways. So I really take sustenance from having a lot of friends. I have a lot of friends. And I see my friends when I travel, and I contact them, and I email them, and I just keep up with them. And I take great sustenance from that. And so all the organizations I've been involved with have been a way of seeing my friends and doing good at the same time. So I'm very active in the Sedona Conference, as is Monica, although we do different things in the Sedona Conference. I'm active in the American End of Court Foundation because I love the work that they do. And I'll give you an example in those two organizations. So I became very close friends with Kent Jordan, who is a judge on the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. He and I have absolutely nothing in common in terms of religion or politics. And yet he spoke at my portrait hanging because I count him as one of my very closest friends. And so I have met great people in everything I've done, and I have been fairly calculated, although my secretary would say I'm not calculated at all and I should have a little item in my purse that says, just say no. I do have a hard time declining invitations, but I try to get involved in things that will facilitate my interest in being with people I enjoy and doing good work. And the Sedona Conference and the End of Court Foundation both allow me to do just that. Now that I'm the chief judge, I do have to say no to some things because there's just too much going on, and there's only 48 hours in a day. And so I have to say no a little more often than I used to. But I recognize a responsibility to do good in the community and to advance the cause of lawyers in America. It makes me feel terrible when lawyers are attacked as not being worthy of being called professionals. I mean, the truth of the matter is that our country is now and always has been dependent on the great work of lawyers and judges. And people don't like lawyers, but when they get in trouble, they love their own. And it is a wonderful cause that we are all a part of. It's not Shangri-La every day, but we all make a real difference in the world, and we should be proud of that. And I don't even tell lawyer jokes. I think they are insulting and demeaning to our profession. You know, I can tell a joke as well as the next person and take one too, but it encourages people to be disrespectful of our profession. And I'm very proud of lawyers. There's, of course, rotten apples in every barrel. There are judges who don't deserve the title and lawyers who don't. But as a general proposition, we are probably the most important profession there is in the United States, just after teachers, and we should stand up proudly for it.
Well said. I'm going to come back to business development in a couple of minutes, but I do just want to echo your comments about the value of bar association activities. And, you know, we're in this wonderful facility that we're so lucky to have. I remember joining the firm, and I didn't say this at the beginning, but when I was joining Carrington Coleman, and I, about a week before my first day, found out that who my supervising partner was going to be, and it was Barbara Lynn. I was terrified, by the way. Apparently I had written down that I was interested in, among many, many other things, probate litigation, and since she does everything, she was the probate lawyer in the firm, among other things, so they decided that that would be a good assignment. But I did, in watching her, you know, remarkable career, see how much personal satisfaction she got from her bar association activities, and joined the DAYL right after I got to the firm. And the thing I didn't expect out of it that I really see today in Technicolor is the relationships that you make as the very youngest of lawyers. You know, the people that you get on a committee with or do a project with really can turn out to be some of your closest friends over your career, and they tend to be the kind of people who, like you, want to do something, want to make a difference, and they all go on to do interesting things. A lot of my peers in the Young Lawyer Leagues have gone on to be, you know, judges and general counsel and elected officials, and are really giving back to the community. So great credit to the Dallas Women Lawyers and the Dallas Association of Young Lawyers for providing the opportunity for everyone to make those connections. I want to talk for a few minutes about tips for young lawyers while we're on the subject, and specifically about building a career, not so much on the business development side, but about getting experience. We know it's hard for young lawyers in many types of law practice, especially when you're in litigation. I know not everyone here is a litigator, but to get the kind of practical experience that really helps you launch your career. So what advice would you give, and I know you give lots of advice to young lawyers, what advice would you give to a young lawyer about how to jumpstart their legal practice?
Well, in the federal court, we have a program where when individuals represent themselves and they survive motions to dismiss and summary judgment, that if we think the case has any legs, we will appoint a lawyer who will handle the case pro bono. And that's very good experience in those cases. They're difficult cases. They don't usually prevail, but they can. I've had several of those. Jones Day handled one, and they had 4 young lawyers on the file. And the senior lawyer in the firm came down and read depositions. And they had a partner sitting full-time at counsel table saying nothing except to advise the young lawyers. And then my deal with them was afterwards I gave them a critique. And I think it was invaluable experience for them because trials are few and far between these days. I also, you might know, have my own rule, and a couple of my colleagues are following it too, and that is to encourage that young lawyers be the ones arguing matters in my court. I don't require it because, first of all, some firms don't have young lawyers, small firms. Sometimes the client just says no, and I don't want to supersede that relationship with the client, but I strongly encourage it. And it gives lawyers an opportunity to say to the client, that crazy Judge Lynn, you know, she likes young lawyers, we better send a young lawyer down there. And so they do. And they are extremely well prepared. It's not the junior varsity, so they get the same tough questioning from me that a senior lawyer would get. But generally, they treasure those opportunities so much that they are superb. I had one case, Monica knows, that the young lawyer just froze. One case, deer in the headlights moment, couldn't talk. And I wasn't about to let that go south. The senior lawyer was there, and I said, Mr. Jones, would you like to address the question? I didn't embarrass the young lawyer, so I'm all about that. I'm not using this as a technique to prejudice a client's interest. But with that one exception, young lawyers have done great. I would hate to see us get to the point where people are becoming partners in law firms where they've never tried a case or had a meaningful courtroom experience. That would be silly. So we have to manufacture these opportunities because they don't come along as often as they used to.
I was interviewing a judicial clerk this morning, and she asked me this question about, what advice, I would have for her in 60 days, wherever she ends up practicing law. And I told a story about Judge Lynn that, when I got to the law firm, I think within about 60 days, I was defending my first deposition. I was out interviewing witnesses in a Title IX case. I was off to court and, kept looking over my shoulder like, are you sure you realize I have not done any of this before? But she, I think, just like Jim Coleman before her, recognized that young lawyers really can do it. And I think sometimes when we become more experienced lawyers, we forget to let go the reins and let the young lawyers go, really, take a stab at something, because the sooner you can do your first whatever it is, then it's not your first one anymore, and that leads to more and more experience, and certainly kick-started my courtroom career for sure.
I think you also have to volunteer to help in the firm, even if it's not your matter, to get yourself in court so you can observe a trial. And I think you should go down and watch trials. If you want to be a trial lawyer, you should keep your ear to the ground, and when you hear about something good that's going on, where there are going to be good lawyers that you can model your own behavior after, that's a good thing to go watch trial.
You touched a little bit on mentors and having mentors, and I know you are one of the best known mentors out there. You've probably got, hundreds and hundreds of people who consider themselves your mentees. You talk a little bit about the importance of mentorship in building a person's career.
Are you my mentee, Leslie? Yeah, I've had a lot of mentees over the years. Leslie interned for me, and I would say, so all my law clerks are my mentees. Many of my interns are my mentees. I'd say about a third of my interns keep up with me. The other 2/3 are gone into the ether somewhere, which I don't understand because it's sort of it's a contact that's a good one to keep up, but they go on to other things. I did say at a public engagement about a year ago that my mentoring door was closed, and I had a lot of pushback from that, but it's very time consuming to really do it right, and there's just so many hours in the day. So I think it is the responsibility of senior people to put a hand out to pull people up instead of pull the ladder away and let them fall. And people who are successful fall into one or the other of those categories. And so I think it's a very good idea to try to hook on to someone who is willing to give you the time and the devotion to assist you in your career. And you don't have to go for the person that has the most mentees, because that's going to make it difficult for you to get quality time. And just to pitch for the Inns of Court, those are essentially mentoring organizations to help lawyers get mentoring from someone with whom they do not practice, because the practice setting sometimes is counterindicated in terms of a good mentoring relationship. So those are wonderful organizations in which you can make friends that will last a lifetime, and everybody who is in that organization at a senior level is interested in assisting younger lawyers. That's why they're there.
Let's talk a little bit about peer networks. I think in addition to having kind of senior mentors, I know you have a really strong group of peer friends. What kind of impact has that had on your career, and what advice do you have on the importance of that as we forge our way through the profession?
So my husband and I have a home in Santa Fe, and we were there last week. My mom was there with us, and I had 2 events going on back to back. First, I had federal district judge training, which we get every couple of years, and the choices were Santa Fe or Washington. And you can guess that most people went to Santa Fe because they brought their spouses with them for a little holiday. And after that, I had my law clerk reunion, literally back to back. So I invited 70 people who were there for the district judge workshop to our home for cocktails and dinner, not a sit-down dinner, buffet dinner. And I looked around that room and I thought, there's nobody in here that would do that but me. Because that's an intimidating thing to run and do. And I thought, I can't believe anybody would think I wouldn't do that. Because I took great pleasure and joy from doing that. And a couple of my friends invited their friends. And so I met all these people that were with friends of mine that I did not know, and now I know them. And I called them all when they arrived the FODs, the Friends of Dan. And on the way out, I told them that they were now the FOBs because I just got to know them and be friends with them. So the advantage to me at my level is that sometimes I need something, and I have plenty of people that I can call and ask for help. We needed to bring in a visiting judge on a case. I have a lawyer friend from Ohio that I met through the American College of Trial Lawyers. Pick up the phone. He's going to say, sure, to me, as I would if he were to ask me. So I've got people around the country that I can ask for assistance and favors, and I give it back to. And that kind of network is perfect for you as young lawyers to form and cultivate, because you're never going to be successful all by yourself. You need a network of people, and even though I'm not developing business, I find this network of people to be very helpful. Occasionally I'll have a sticky wicket problem in a case that's not going to be answered in the books, and I've got a lot of judge friends that I can call in confidence if I just want to shoot the breeze about something that is germane to one of my cases. So I think building a strong network is important, but you have to nurture it. It doesn't grow by itself. It has to be attended to, you have to be reciprocal in your thinking, and you have to let people know that you are there for them as well.
We've acknowledged your mother, Nelda Golden, who's in the audience. We've talked a little bit about your amazing husband, Mike Lynn. We haven't talked about your 2 children.
Oh, goody. What about my grandchildren? So I have 2 daughters. They are 36 and 31, almost 32. My younger daughter, Whitney, just got married about 6 weeks ago in Lake Tahoe, California. And I have 2 granddaughters. My older daughter, Tara, is an emergency room pediatrician in Denver, and her husband, Tracy, is a teacher. And they've got my 2 granddaughters, and I have pictures of my granddaughters as the flower girl in their Aunt Whitney's wedding. If anyone wants to look at it, look at them. It's only 10 cents a peek. So I have 2 granddaughters, 2 daughters. So my husband says if we're going to have any boys, he's got to depend on our younger daughter. My younger daughter and her husband live in San Francisco, California. She's in the tech world, and he's a wealth manager at the Royal Bank of Canada. So my kids don't live here, but if you have to travel to see your family, Denver and San Francisco aren't bad. You've probably noted that even though their parents are lawyers, neither of our children are lawyers, and neither of them ever had any interest at all in being lawyers. I remember when Whitney was little, they asked her what did her mom and dad do for a living, and she said they talked on the phone. And so I'm very proud of my children and their husbands. One of my children and her husband are do-gooders. The doctor works for a children's hospital, and as I said, her husband's a teacher. He did Teach for America and then became a teacher and teaches middle school science and has no interest in being an administrator. He just wants to be a teacher. And the other 2 are making their way in the corporate financial world and doing very well. So 2 different approaches, but no interest in lawyering.
Now, for those of you who may have children or may be about to have children, maybe thinking about how you reconcile having children with this crazy job that we do. When I joined the firm, I think the girls were in maybe like fifth grade, middle school, something like that. They were right in the thick of it. And so I witnessed a person who was at the peak of her career as a partner, as a trial lawyer, also, dealing with soccer games and birthday parties and wanting to be the best mom she can be. So having survived that and now gotten to the grandmother stage where you can sit back and enjoy it, what advice do you have for people who were back in the earlier stages of what you went through and how to balance everything?
So I remember when I came back to work after I had my second daughter, I went to see Jim Coleman and I said, whatever you are charging for me is too much. I mean, I just was so distracted and, I just was having a hard time keeping it all together. So it is really tough to do it. And I've been very fortunate that I've never needed a lot of sleep, and I've never had a lot of sleep. And I've always operated on the assumption that sleep is overrated. A friend of mine, Sandy Chapman, who's the head of the Center for Brain Health, she is always counseling me that you need 8 hours sleep and multitasking is bad. And I've said to her, man, I would be really dangerous if I followed that advice. People would be petrified to appear before me if I had 8 hours sleep and wasn't multitasking. So too bad. I am not following her advice. I've never followed it, and I'm not going to follow it. But it is a challenge. I mean, I had to be really organized. It's still the case. I went to all those soccer games. Both my kids played soccer. My younger daughter was the captain of her college soccer team in Waterville, Maine. And during her soccer season for her league games, except for one, I went to every single game her senior year. So every Friday, I went up to Maine or some other place in New England for the weekend. In a perfect situation, it took me 7 hours of travel to get there. And I did it. And was I tired on Monday mornings when I had court? Yes, indeed. But I wanted to do it, so I did. I did pretty well most of the time. I had one story. My kids went to Hockaday, and at Hockaday, I don't know if they're still doing this, but there was a special event called the Secret Garden Tea. And it was very special for the girls because they didn't have to wear their uniforms. They got to wear beautiful tea clothes. So every year the calendar for the year would come out and I would put it on my calendar. And a reminder notice came out, and that's what it was called, reminder notice, Secret Garden Tea. And I already had it on my calendar, so I threw it away. And I drove up for the Secret Garden Tea, and I thought, there are a lot of cars here. Why is that? And then the doors opened and people flooded out. So they had moved it up 1 hour, and the reminder notice said that, but it didn't say reminder notice and time change, it just said reminder notice. So I did not notice. So when I came in, there was my daughter with the guidance counselor crying her guts out. And I said to the counselor, when you're done with her, I need some counseling too. So I had a couple of bumps in the road, but generally I did a pretty good job. I would leave the office and go to whatever and then come back. I will admit some frustration when, for the track meet, I volunteered to be responsible for the beverages. And when I went to the meeting, after 2 hours of discussing how I was going to transport the tea from my car to the field, I said to the non-working moms that were all there, I got this. So there were some expectations of where you could be everything at the highest level every day. And I judged myself on the 5-grade scale, and as long as I did not fall below a C- in mothering every day, I gave myself credit. I couldn't be an A+ lawyer and an A+ mother every day. And my kids turned out all right, so I think I adhered to the C- as the low threshold. But it was tough. I commend all of you who have to go through that. I had a nanny, I had my parents here and my husband's family here, so we had a lot of support. I also had friends who were lawyers who had children, and we were the ultimate backstop for each other when everything else fell through, and I certainly recommend that. But it's a worthwhile endeavor to try to do this and to do that. You all are, I think most of you are too young to remember that there was a commercial where the pitch was that women could do it all the time. You could look beautiful, your makeup would be perfect, your hair would be wonderfully done, and you'd look fantastic, and you'd go to work, and then you'd come home and make dinner and clean the kitchen, and your kids would be A+ students all the time, and that's a bunch of hogwash. You all know that. That was just TV. But you just have to do the best you can and recognize when something has to give, because it's impossible to be perfect at everything all the time.
I think you raised some pretty spectacular kids, so I think you did much better than a C-. We have a few minutes for questions. I want to be sure to give everyone a chance to ask them if they have them. Yes, go ahead. So the question is, things are out there in the profession now that still need to change for women?
Well, I will make a comment that the escalation, I'm going to address my comments principally to the law firm setting. So the escalation in compensation for lawyers is a horrible thing. It is a horrible thing because law firms are not charitable institutions. And when they pay these ridiculous salaries, where my law clerks make more than I do when they stop working for me, those come with expectations of ridiculous hours and expectations of work. And, this work-life balance, I'm not really sure what that means. It's all life. But you have to make choices about where you're going to devote your time. And so law firms, by having this sort of up or out policy, expect that everyone is going to make the choice to work 80-hour weeks. And you can't have a very well-rounded life if you're working 80-hour weeks all the time. And so I think law firms need to be more creative about their expectations, and women should not be ashamed to ratchet back and then go full power again when circumstances permit, and men should not be ashamed of that either. So I think law firms need to move away from one model of what will ensure success of the firm. There's certain kinds of work that you can't do on a reduced hour basis. I recognize that, but there are many valuable parts of law practice that can be done on a reduced hour basis. So I think it's still hard to satisfy the expectations of law firms. And the truth of the matter is that child-rearing responsibilities fall more on women than they do on men. Everybody can name a family where the guy does as much as the woman does, but I guarantee you can name 10 times as many where the traditional roles of child-rearing are the roles that apply. And so it falls harder on women to do it all. And that, I don't think, has changed materially since I was a young lawyer.
I would add awareness of implicit or inherent bias also. I think we're becoming more aware of that in all types of situations, not just gender, but I still show up for depositions and the receptionist says, "Mr. Smith, your court reporter's here." That's been happening since I was in my 20s, and that's a fact of life that is just going to change as role models change, as people become more used to seeing people of all different types and all different types of jobs. But I think that's something that we probably didn't really realize how bad it was, and now the studies are showing us that it's there. And so being aware of that and doing what we can to help adjust that would be something I would.
Well, and I will say a word about the Me Too movement. I mean, this is a problem in law firms. This was a problem known to be in law firms before now. The power imbalance that is the root of many instances of sexual harassment is certainly obvious in a law firm setting. It can be obvious in a corporate setting as well. There are instances of this in the judiciary. There are cases of law clerks having been victims of sexual harassment, and you can just imagine the difficulty in someone feeling empowered to report sexual harassment in a setting where they're going to work for a judge who has a significant influence on the rest of their career, and generally you only work for that person for a year. Alex Kaczynski, whose name has been mentioned several times in the hearings today, because Judge Kavanaugh worked for Judge Kaczynski as a law clerk. These circumstances need to be dealt with in an aggressive way. As I said, I went to a program at the same judge training, and the program was called Respectful Workplaces in the Me Too Movement. And I said, these examples of sexual harassment or retaliation or discrimination are critically important for us to deal with, but there are jerks everywhere in the world, and many of them are federal judges. And so boorish behavior or overly aggressive behavior or power trip behavior, come to work at 3 o'clock in the morning. You're my bronze law clerk. The other two are my silver and gold. These are real examples of things. That's harsh and rude behavior, but it's not sexual harassment. And we need to deal with the sexual harassment discrimination part of it. I have no optimism that we can turn all federal judges into people who we would want to introduce to our moms. Some of them will be that, but some are not.
All right, I think we're about out of time, but if there aren't any other questions, I'll turn it back over to Jennifer.
Well, thank you both. The only thing I will say in conclusion is to mark your calendar for the very last of these interviews for the year. November the 1st, here at the DAYL at noon, Judge Katharina Haynes will be interviewed by her husband. So that should be interesting and should help us to continue the conversation. So thank you for being here. Thank you both again.